come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes one.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter. And I'm thrilled to welcome two guests for today's episode. Our first guest is one of the finest writers in the business and someone whom all of you would have definitely read at some point. ESPN Cricinfo's assistant editor, Siddharth Monga. Thanks so much for joining, Siddharth.
Thanks a lot. I'm glad to be on a real platform for a change.
Well, okay. A real platform from your fake platform that you work for. And I normally introduce our guests with their Twitter handle, but I see Monga has been smart enough to stay away from there. Or do you actually have a handle and you lurk?
Twitter's not a real platform.
But seriously, somebody told me that you lurk there. Is it true?
No, but that's part of my job, isn't it, to follow news? And so we have a handle which follows all handles that tweet about cricket news and etc. So we do follow news on working days.
No, I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to keep it to myself.
Oh, okay. So you actually know his Twitter handle. Okay, wonderful.
It's not my Twitter handle.
Okay, the company Twitter handle. Or
he
whatever.
denies it.
All right. So
plausible deniability.
I haven't even introduced you, but you have already got into the chat. But let me do it anyway. This is Kartikeya Date. He's been on our podcast before. A blogger, essayist, someone who has an original take on many things, including cricket. So you can follow him at Cricketing View, and where he shares all his articles and other pieces of insight. So actually, the idea for this podcast emerged from one of Kartikeya's recent pieces. He has written something in his Substack. I mean, you can subscribe to his newsletter. So he has written something about sports writing and the narrative devices that many writers tend to use when reporting on a sport. Reading the piece, it struck me that we actually don't talk that much about the nitty-gritties of sports writing itself. We talk a lot about sport. We talk a lot about language of sport, but the method and the way in which we write about it, I don't think gets as much of discussion. So I thought, it'll be ideal to bring in Kartikeya because he had written the piece and he also has a lot of ideas about it. He's written about it earlier as well. And also somebody like Monga who covers cricket on a daily basis. And interestingly, Monga is somebody, probably as far as I can think, one of the very, very few writers who covers the entire range of writing. He does ball-by-ball commentary. He also does 8,000, 10,000 word pieces, and he does everything in between. So it'll be great to get his thoughts on this whole thing. So Kartikeya, my idea is to begin by you expanding a bit on that. I mean, briefly summarizing what you said, and then we can get into a bit more detail about different themes to explore.
81 All Out is a fantastic venue. It's where the peanut gallery gets to yell at the real people who do the work day in and day out. It's like,
so you have put yourself as part of the peanut gallery now.
I am the peanut gallery.
Okay. Well, you also write for a fake platform like Cricinfo from time to time, by the way.
Yeah, like 6 times a year. It's not. So that if you are watching a cricket match standing on the boundary, like in one day, accidentally you'll jump onto the ground 6 times. I mean, you sort of cross the boundary, step over. Oh, it happens.
Okay, so now take it away.
Oh, well, basically, I have had over the last 10, 15 years, ever since I first thought about first writing a blog and then writing about cricket. And then, I sort of, fell ass backwards into writing for Cricinfo and other people. That the way we describe the game is often shaped by our obsession with telling stories. and that the game does not lend itself to these types of descriptions all the time. And that this obsession with telling stories often, beats the course of the game into shapes which do it disservice. Now, I understand why we tell stories. There's a whole literature and a whole field of narrative which studies why people tell stories. And then there are people who have argued famously and otherwise that we tell. There are 6 basic types of narratives that we have. We tell of redemption and whatnot. And what I realized over the years is that the way we describe cricket matches, the way we describe moments in cricket matches, perhaps comes from this impulse to tell stories. Because we always talk in terms of these clutch plays and crunch moments and big important overs and less important overs and stuff like that. And that has always bothered me because there's nothing in the game which would make that sort of thing possible. It's sort of, you take a tactical choice made by a team and turn it into an inevitability. And so you say that, well, okay, commonly all teams back in the day in ODIs would protect wickets early in the innings and then let the asking rate climb, and then with wickets in hand, spend those wickets over the last 15 overs to chase like 7 or 8 an over, right? But that doesn't mean that those last 15 overs are more important than the first 35 overs, right? There's no reason why the teams have to sort of hold back in the first 35 overs. And basically, that's what Owen Morgan did, right? I mean, Owen Morgan's England basically decided that, well, no, we're not going to, sit back in those first 35 hours. We're going to keep pushing all the way through. So did Owen Morgan's team break a narrative, or did they just keep playing the same game and make different tactical choices? And if they make different tactical choices, do the big moments and small moments go away, or do they move somewhere else, or what happens? And if that happens, then how big were the big moments before? I mean, it's just some people are making some choices and it's putting them in some positions. But the point is that the outcome of the game is as much a consequence of them putting themselves in those positions as it is of them then sometimes getting out of those positions, right? So, but if you sort of think of a game as a movie, then you have to have a denouement and you have to have a dark period, and it is darkest before the dawn, and this, that, and the other, and these are stories that we tell ourselves. And sometimes I think the desire to tell the story gets ahead of the story of the game. And I think over the years, what seems to have happened is that this type of storytelling has shaped the understanding of the game itself, which is for someone who is interested in describing the game kind of problematic.
So, yeah, it's interesting that back when I started reading cricket reports for the first time, that, the kind of reports that we used to get, they're very sort of straight and, the facts and lay out who scored what happened, mostly chronological. But occasionally, if it was a really thrilling match, start off at the end and go to the beginning. But I mean, and that was like almost a given. You don't depart from that in any newspaper or any place that, you read back then. But then you had this other forms like magazines and things that started coming in, and where people started experimenting with stories. But I think at a fundamental level, sports writing and sports writers also get a lot of, in a way of expressing their love for the game, and in a way of the readers expressing their own love for the game by reading that piece. It is automatically the stories and the narratives and everything that comes in becomes almost a part of sports writing. And it has over the years as well. So I want to bring in Monga in there about that, and about how, the inevitability almost of the story becoming, of the report or a piece about sport becoming a story or a combination of stories.
I would disagree with Kartikeya where he says every moment in theory matters as much as the next. And because you played a certain way in the earlier moments, you find yourself in a situation which becomes interesting or exciting to the outside world towards the end of the game. But and how it's a great point how sides must have thought, hey, what can we do to improve our ODI game? Hey, these are the middle overs which were quiet, so let's try to capitalize on them. That's a little bit like the full court press in basketball, or how Rafael Nadal changed the game by contesting every point with higher intensity for which he worked on his fitness. So all that happened, but as a storyteller or as a match reporter, let's not use the word story here. As a match reporter, also, like, given a limited space, we also have the almost the duty to report in a way where if the teams have decided middle overs are almost like a no contest zone where we are happy with uh, Bopara and Martin and Steve Waugh bowling, not Steve Waugh, Bopara and Martin, those kind of bowlers bowling for 5 and over, and we won't give away a wicket. We will tend to not give it enough space or enough attention in our reports at the end of the day. Even during commentary, I would tend to not focus and not spend that much energy on it. That's a tactical choice I am making as a narrator of how the match went. And you'll see the same in on-air commentary where people are getting only half an hour stints, so you would expect them to be at their best to engross themselves into what is happening. But they also tell you that they get a feel of that action that is happening, and it's not as closely contested as those overs are later, and which is a tactical decision they made for whatever reasons. Maybe they had their limitations, maybe they were going by their received wisdom from the previous eras about how to bat in the middle overs, which they changed, and which made us change. I'm sure there could have been a piece before whoever changed this middle over batting. There could have been pieces asking teams, hey, why aren't you changing your batting? But that would not be part of your story of your explaining of what happened in the match that day. So as I agree, like, a lot of people will still tend to focus only on the end, but as professional, or even somebody telling the match story to somebody, we would tend to gloss over the first 35 overs and talk about the last 15, which is when you could see the intensity has picked up. Yes, it's a tactical choice. That moment is not bigger than the previous 35 overs, but this is what the teams are doing, and we are reacting to it.
Yeah, which brings me to an interesting point, which I want to elaborate, actually, which you said about the players themselves. How the players themselves are treating certain parts of the game differently, which you observe, which you hear from players. When they talk about games, they talk about it in a certain way. And as a sports writer, you're in constant touch with players, whether in press conference or interviews or whatever. You slowly begin to understand how a player sees the game. So, but my question is that to both of you, Monga can start, is that as a sports writer, does it almost become second nature to you to then write about the game from the way a player would a player is approaching it, or a player is thinking about it?
Yeah, I mean, what do you try to do there's a test match going on? What are you trying to see on a field? The first thing you're trying to see is, how is the bowling side attempting to get a wicket? What is the bowling side? Because the bowling side will initiate the action here. What is the bowling side trying to achieve in the next 5-10 overs? So if it is 55 to 60 to 80 overs where Damon Martin and Andrew Simons are bowling through, and the opposition is 4 or 5 down, and they don't want to lose a wicket before the new ball is due, you wouldn't give that much attention to that spell of play, because you are reacting to what they're doing. And this doesn't need you to even be in constant touch with them, because we know press conference, they're not the most honest people in press conference. They just tend to say whatever. But also, now that you've brought up players tend to believe also that this guy came good when it mattered. They use the word when it mattered more than we do. You just listen to them. They will say he came good when it really mattered. But what I think they mean is like, yes, if it's a ODI, there are 600 moments, let's say. The previous 590 moments are gone. You still had a chance to make up for any mistake in those 590 moments. In these last 10 moments, you cannot make up for any mistake. This is the final act. So that's why it matters more to them. And that's why they say he came good when it really mattered.
That's very interesting. And I've heard that too. But Kartikeya, so your thoughts on that and your comment on that, on the fact that, the players too are saying this more often than the writers are.
Right. First, I want to go back to what you said earlier about the match report, because I remember those match reports as well. And I think what has happened since then is that now nobody really writes those match reports anymore, because everybody sees what happens on TV, right? Everybody knows what happened in the game. So basically that straight match report is gone. So like whatever, even Sid will sit in the press box and he's taking his notes, right? Every few overs, he's writing down, okay, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. I mean, he doesn't have to sit there and, make an essay out of it, because he knows that not only have everybody watched on TV, everybody has also been probably following the score. Everybody has also been following the ball by ball on Cricinfo or wherever else, right? For the purposes of this conversation, let's say it's only Cricinfo.
Only fake platforms.
Yeah. Only Cricinfo. And so basically what happened in the game, the straight answer to that question invariably goes unstated, because it is assumed that everybody's seen it.
But we do.
Right.
Cricinfo does. That's the thing with Cricinfo. I think one of the problems with Cricinfo is so much content gets lost. But still, our most read piece on a match is the direct match report, the straight match report that we do, and we still do that. You won't read it because you have seen the match. You will.
Yeah, I don't read it.
You will tend to go to the site.
No, but one thing, Monga, that match report as well
has evolved.
Has evolved way from the 80s and the the staid newspaper match reports. That's
because those match reports were match reports that you could write off scorecards. You didn't need to watch those matches.
No.
Yeah, but
I'm pretty sure there were some good ones then too. Come on.
No, but it was also extremely explicit. No, I mean, in the sports page, I remember the back page of, say, the Indian Express or the Times or whatever. There used to be one story which was literally titled match report, a review of the day's play. And then there was like a analysis piece. And then like if the paper had lots of money, then Sunil Gavaskar's column. So, but see, the point is still that agreed that fine, players are making tactical choices, and players are, there's a conventional wisdom about tactics, right? So this is also why, there isn't like this, there aren't like these mystery genius captains, cropping up every game after game.
What are you saying?
Right? Like everybody knows what the options are, and everybody knows what the most common obvious option is most of the time. Even if the choice is conventional, it still means that the game was as much decided because of the conventional choice as it was because of what happened in the end.
Agreed.
So what happens is, if you do that over 100 games, if you stop referring to the conventional choice, then what happens with the audience is that the audience begins to think that, what happens in those first 15, 20 overs doesn't really matter. And basically nothing happens in those first 15, 20 overs or whatever, n overs, right? And then you get to this idea that there are big moments and short moments. And there is a sort of an insidious sort of, underlying point to this, because it sort of feeds into this, extremely alluring idea that if only you come good when it really matters, life works out for you. It is sort of a very anti-excellence kind of view of the world, which I think writers should care about that sort of thing, as to what subliminal message are you participating in, because of the patterns of what you produce.
I think we tend to differentiate between, an MS Dhoni scoring 20 runs on the first 40 balls and then taking the asking rate up and then finishing it off. And we tend to call it out, those kind of things, which is because they are slightly not conventional. Whereas when there is a tactic that is understood as, it happens all the time, we tend to ignore it and we sort of say, okay, both the sides did it and we came down to this situation.
No, but the question is, I still don't know why he does it. You see, and there's probably a reason as to.
Maybe he believes that this is when it really matters, the bowler will blink.
No, I think it means that he's worried about the resources available to him. I've looked at his record and I think I've even done pieces on this, which is that most of the time when he does that, it means that there's been trouble before. Basically there's been a collapse or like someone in the top four hasn't done
semi-final, like in the World Cup semi-final.
Exactly. Yeah. He started out in a hole and then he's trying to get out of it. It's not that he's making a conscious choice to stay in the hole. It's that the hole is really deep.
And he doesn't like taking risks. I mean, that World Cup.
Nobody likes taking risks, right? I mean, every player ever is going to try to win. It's a competitor. He's trying to do the thing that he thinks is most likely to get him to win.
No, but surely you agree, Kartikeya, that there's a difference between a batsman who is willing to take one risk, say, in the 40th over, versus a batsman who is unwilling to take any risk till 47 or 48th over. Those are not independent choices. No, those are choices shaped by what's happening at the other end. I mean, the way India played with Dhoni all the time is that there's always like the runs at the other end when Dhoni is batting are always coming like 20% faster. And when India win, they come 20% faster. Like Suresh Raina, Yuvraj Singh, or whoever else over the years, Kedar Jadhav, or, they get out more often, but they also score more quickly. It's not just Dhoni. Dhoni is one half of the story. The competitive description of that game is that India have this strategy where they go from one end and they stick they offer only that end to the opposition, and Dhoni holds his end up and makes sure that the opposition doesn't have an in from the other end as well, right? So and most of the time when you are chasing 6 or 7 runs an over, that's enough. But that's also why like when in T20 it gets to like 10 an over, you can't do that. Then you have to go from both ends. This story it's not just about Dhoni. I mean, it becomes about Dhoni, and you and I know, and Siddharth knows why it becomes about Dhoni.
No, but also,
it becomes about Dhoni for the same reason that, when Kohli's sitting in the dugout on TV, like he still appears on TV more often than like the non-striker. It happens for that reason.
So Dhoni holding one end up just brings me back to, the current hot topic, that is the anchor in a T20. You can say teams don't have those resources right now to have many big hitters, so they have an anchor in T20, but there's a minimum rate of efficiency you expect from an anchor, which is what you expect from somebody holding one end up, and not to go at a strike rate of 50, which Dhoni tends to do at the start of his ODI innings when the asking rate is climbing a lot of times, which is where, you want people to look for a single. He just shuts shop.
Yeah, but I don't think that's out of choice. I think that's because he just can't get off strike.
He can't.
I think one of the things about Dhoni especially is that in the last, like ever since he stopped playing Test cricket, he's not really playing that much cricket. Like right now, everybody's saying, "Oh, he's in terrible form in the IPL." He has not played for 438 days before the start of the IPL.
One point about Dhoni related to our topic is very important, and I want to ask Monga about this. And I personally have spoken to a few players. You have obviously spoken to more players. But the question is that I feel that players genuinely believe in this Dhoni shtick. Okay. And when Dhoni is there in the end, in the last 3 overs, even when the run rate is high, if the bowler believes and the fielder believes and the fielding team believes that this is a guy who has done this before, he will take it to the last over, the bowler will eventually succumb. If that there is a certain thought in players' mind, and if the game proceeds that way, then is it almost, and then of course if you know about it from experience and reading the game and speaking to players, then it almost becomes like it's low hanging fruit there, right? Like you have to write about it.
And Dhoni, they do believe this and more. Dhoni has told somebody that he's known to have told somebody that I like to take it to the last over when it is 1-on-1. I'm taking on the bowler, and I love to hit the first ball for a six, and not just any six, but a huge six. He should hear it and he should know it's a six. So, and he's done that. You see how he bats. He takes it to the last over, and every time he tries to hit the first ball for a six. He's done that successfully, and he's failed while doing that also. And bravo in one of the overs, I think it was that 200 game in US where India couldn't score some 10.
Oh, yeah. Florida, yeah.
The same thing happened. And Bravo knows if there's 2 runs required of the last ball, and he said that on the record, if there's 2 runs required of the last ball, Dhoni is not going to go for the win. He's going to tie the game. So he knew that. He knew he's going to nurdle it for a 1. So he pulled a wide, slower ball and got a leading edge that took the catch. They know there's a lot of psychological games that Dhoni is trying to play with the guys he's trying to intimidate, which is part of a competitive sport. But he tends to believe in it because he just, again, as we said, it's the last 10 balls. There's no coming back. There's no making up for a mistake. And he backs himself in that sort of mental high stakes situation more than the bowler.
Yeah, so Kartikeya, how does one then factor in that psychology into it? I mean, I'm saying, obviously, in your probabilistically, you're right, but doesn't one have to factor all this into it as well?
No, I mean, I'm not sure what that example does to the point, because sure, I mean, people make all sorts of choices, right? I mean, Dhoni about a dozen times in his ODI career has had last over finishes, and about, I think, I don't remember off the top of my head, I wrote an essay about this, about 8 times or 7 times out of 12 or 13, it's come off, and about 4 or 5 times it hasn't come off, right? But the point is that he's not doing that out of choice, right? He's doing that because given what else has happened in the game, that is his best option, because other than those 13 times, there are 3 or 4 dozen times when, he's been in chases and the game is over by the 47th, 48th over. And he's not even played a big role. Like some other player has scored lots of runs and it's over. So that still doesn't mean that last over is especially important.
No, it doesn't.
He wants to contest it, right? But the point is, he doesn't want to contest all these other overs also. The way it's received and the way people, and Twitter is like is a canary in this regard, because now there's this whole sort of heroic narrative which comes about, which is, I mean, perhaps it's not new, but it's certainly new that people are publishing that they think this to millions of people, right? And I don't mean people like, Cricinfo's star assistant editor on the fake platform. But I mean people like me, hobbyists and stuff like that, fans. Is it healthy that sport is understood in this chauvinistic way? I mean, it is chauvinistic at the end of the day, right? Because it's setting up these supermen and plebeians, and it's sort of creating this hierarchy which doesn't really exist. It exists purely because of a particular view of a competition. It doesn't exist because of the competition itself. You see, so fine. I mean, those stories are fun. I like those. I mean, you can see how popular those types of stories are from, the kinds of sporting events which get made into movies. Nobody makes a movie of a game where, the chase is over by the 44th over. That's never going to make it in a movie.
Nobody makes a movie out of control percentages. Let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. But that's where the sport has something to contribute to the public sphere, which is distinct from other entertainment. No,
but I think our understanding of control percentages or other things, or our understanding of every ball as an event and trying to go beyond these heroic moments has actually enriched our writing and telling of matches. And it will continue to do so. The more we try to study, the more we try to focus on the whole match instead of how we read cricket when we started reading.
The story of the game which is told by the radio commentator is very different from the story of the game which is told by the television commentator or by the reviewer in an age where everybody's seen the game. And so it's not at all obvious that these narratives are inevitable or natural in sport. You see that they are conventional, and I think they are peculiar to this time and to the sort of governing structures of this time. What the incentives for the writer are, what the incentives for the editor who makes the headlines are. And a lot of the times, actually, in some of the other publications, like the headline is wildly incendiary, and then the story inside is like completely normal. But the point is, without the incendiary headline, that story is not going to get read, right? So,
I mean, I think it's a global. It talks to the global phenomenon of the economics of the media industry as well. I mean, the economics, the media is in need for making certain figures into larger than life figures to sort of drive their popularity, and on the flip side is also a need to bring down people to a degree that has probably not happened in a
sometimes
while. I mean,
the same person.
Yeah, sometimes the same person, and sometimes in a matter of a day or two.
Yeah.
and that leads, and that sort of extreme forget sport, in anything, in any field, is probably what is definitely one thing that is driving it. I mean, today, to take an example from the US, for example, today was the game 5 of the World Series, and one of the great pitchers of all time, Clayton Kershaw, was starting, but people were saying how in game 5, if he messes up, then again he'll mess up where it matters. And it's obvious that this where it matters is transcending countries, and which brings me to a question for you, though. I mean, as a writer who's covering a game or who's reviewing, a tournament or something like that, how much of this is playing on your mind? I mean, obviously a lot of writing happens instinctively and you're not thinking too deeply about media economics and all that. But I'm saying, when you look back, I mean, do you feel like these are things that can become habits, not just for you, and I'm not saying you are guilty of anything here, but I'm saying generally in the profession?
Just before I get into that, one of the disturbing things that happens with media is it has started to, because people's opinions are there on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, media has started to react to what people are saying on Twitter and try to feed it, which is slightly very disturbing, because then you forget calling the game or any story, and you are just looking for what is popular. So your original question was about whether there's a temptation or whether you can fall into a habit of getting into narratives. I have personally not felt it. I've personally, maybe earlier when you start out, you've seen there's a general perception of what is good writing, and you try to replicate it or imitate whoever you thought were good writers. but pretty soon you like get an idea of what, after being in that position, as that situation, having seen through a day's play or a series or a tour, you realize, no, that's not what is my writing. That's what good writing according to me is. And I had personally, I've never felt ki, hey, there's this narrative that I need to feed into, or there's some narrative I need to get out of this game. But there's also a demand. You are in a media industry where if on a day Dhoni has taken that game which didn't look like going into the last over, is taken into the last over, there's been heroics. You have to, I mean, if on that day you write about a 3 over tight spell from Akshar Patel between the 20th and 30th over, your editors are not going to be happy with it, because everybody wants to read about that narrative, so to speak.
Because it is in the sphere of conversation, pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the challenge there for a sports writer is to do it, but do it in a way where you are actually taking into account why it went to the last over, whether it was his choice or whether he was forced by circumstances or the resources or the kind of bowling to get into that state. And also you cannot at the same time discount Dhoni's psychology of trying to, whatever he believes in, it could be a bluff, it could be whatever.
Right,
Yeah.
but Cricinfo is not really a good example for this, because Cricinfo is like a dedicated cricket publication. Like they for a major test match, like they're producing probably thousands of words, so they are not going to be prone to such narratives. They're not going to be. They have enough room and they have enough expertise to actually delve into the cricket.
Yeah,
Sorry, if I just went back to the example that I was giving, I still would have room to do a separate piece on
Exactly
good 3 over spell from overs 20 to 30 by somebody. But as newspaper, even the largest newspaper of any language in India would not have that space. If their reporter or sports cricket writer from the field called up their editor and they said, we want to do this, we would be shot down.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, when Dhoni retired, you had a piece on his farewell video, as well as a piece on a larger his career.
Yeah, I got 2 days. I could do it 2 days later too.
Exactly, and then so somebody who follows Cricinfo who reads those 2 pieces, and of course several other pieces that you have written before, gets a well-rounded idea. So even if there is a piece where you fall into this narrative trap, there will be 5 other pieces where you would not have. So then that all comes together and gives the idea. But you're right. I mean, which newspaper has that luxury, or which general interest publication has that luxury?
And I agree, like the further you get from English publications, the further you are getting into this narrative-driven telling of the sport.
Yeah, and also because the kind of people, see, in a general interest publication, you have people who are not that interested in cricket also reading it.
Correct.
So automatically the temptation for the publication is, how does one draw this reader towards us? Yeah. And they're not going to draw them with like in-depth cricketing analysis. They're going to draw them with all these personality-driven, cult-driven, narrative-driven kind of pieces. So, which is why, I've used to feel, in fact, there were occasions where I have written for newspapers, and when I write a Cricinfo kind of piece for them, they get back and say, hey, we are not hardcore cricket, so can you change this para? And okay, I understand, but I can see other people who work there being tempted to go the entire way and say that this is who we have to please. So one of the things that you brought up in that piece, Kartikeya, and I need to I want to expand on this a bit, is that you spoke about that famous Headingley test from last year in the Ashes, where Nathan Lyon basically bowls that over, and then he had a chance to run out Jack Leach. Was it Leach or Stokes? One of them. Yeah, Jack Leach. And then he missed that run-out chance. And how that then became like the focal point, because that happened towards the end of the game. It was in people's minds. And had he got that wicket, Australia would have won. But I also want to bring in the fact that as a cricket watcher itself, isn't that moment writ large in your head and in your memory? I mean, I'm asking this because, this is pretty much cricket imitating life. I mean, you have things that happen in life, and then you have this moment where you have this near miss in an accident or something like that. And of course, you got into that near miss in an accident because 2 seconds earlier you were doing something. But, I'm just talking about how we remember things. We do remember some things in a more magnified way than others. So why can't sport and sporting memory be like that?
I mean, it can be like that, I think. But the point is that you don't need a writer to remember that. People already remember that. The writer's job surely is to have some fidelity to the actual sport, no? To have what happened in that over. What happened in that over is that Nathan Lyon, given Ben Stokes' tremendous assault, was basically, reduced to being extremely negative. He bowled flat most of the over, and he tossed up one or two balls to see if Stokes could be tempted into going for a six. And Stokes was tempted, and he did. He did. I mean, he went for it, and it came off. But the point is that Lyon only tried that 2 or 3 times in the over. The 4 out of 6 times in that over, he didn't try it. Now, the fact that he didn't try it from a cricket point of view is extremely significant, right? Because at that time, another bowler might have been bolder and might have tossed it up more and might have sort of tempted fate and, been extremely attacking and, made the bet that, okay, Stokes will hit 1, he'll hit 2, but he won't hit 3. The bowler is not even part of the story in that over. How can the bowler not be part of the story of that over if you're writing about cricket? Right? Fine, the memory always works, by, the shiniest thing is always imprinted most indelibly. The 3 things people are going to remember about that Headingley test is, one is Ben Stokes is damn good at hitting sixes. The second thing is that Tim Paine is horrible at DRS. And the third is that Nathan Lyon missed a run out. And those are like...
And the fourth thing is Jack Leach regularly cleans his glasses.
Yeah, he cleans his glasses, yeah.
He's a hero for us.
Legend, yeah.
All 3 of us.
Yeah. But that's not cricket, is it? I mean, the cricket cannot be optional.
Look, if I put myself, I would be in the shoes of somebody writing on that match. I wouldn't be focusing too much on that missed run out. It's the same. It's as significant to me as a catch somebody might have missed 3 hours before this. Even if it was Stokes's or somebody else's, it's as significant as that. And catches and missed runouts are not that significant because they tend to cancel each other out. Because statistically, they just happen.
It can happen anytime.
Yeah.
No, but the point is...
My question is a little broader about whether sports writing should, sort of, at least it should have any kind of connection with how we remember games, or it should be, a writer's job, as Kartikeya is detailing, is to actually go the other way and to stick to the exact cricketing.
Given how social media goes and vilifies people who commit such mistakes, maybe it's our job to say it was not that big a mistake. Maybe it is on certain days. The other day when Tewatia was batting and he got stuck, and I was doing comment, I was getting a lot of angry feedback. Why is he not stepping onto the wicket? Why are they not retiring him out? And I said, I'm watching the match and I can see he's trying to hit. It's not like he's not trying to hit, and it's not like he's clueless. He's picking the googlies. He picked every googly. He tried to go over mid off or wide long off. He just couldn't connect that day. And sometimes you just keep doing it, and so it just comes off. It was one of those rare days when it came off. But maybe it's our job to say, even if we had not succeeded that day, maybe it's our job to say, hey, there's no need to vilify him. He was doing what has brought him here. He was doing, and tactically it probably made sense for him to go in because there were two leg spinners, so left-hand batsman makes sense, and he was trying to do the best, and it didn't come off. You don't need to vilify him.
Which brings me to the next point is, and maybe Siddharth can start because he's writing day in and day out, is sometimes do you feel that, for whatever reason, when you're writing, it could be a whole report, it could be a part of a report, it could be just a little bit here and there, that you write about your experience of watching the game rather than, the describing the game itself. Because at the end of the day, you're also a watcher. You've also grown up watching cricket. You also love the game at a certain level. So I'm saying that fine line between writing about the game and writing about your experience of watching it.
See, the more I've written, the more I've tried to stay away from it. And I think I succeeded in doing that in terms of not bringing my experience of what I was feeling at that time. There'll definitely be pieces in which you can do that, but not in a day's review or a match report or even ball by ball. So the advantage that we have is we get to do all kinds of, ball by ball is where you are engrossed into like every ball the way Kartikeya would want you to be, and you're almost like the same intensity to every ball. Then you do a report which is a direct telling of almost agency like, but and then there's analysis where you pick out one narrative, which you have the space. I try to stay away from bringing my own experience into it. But sometimes you are going through something in life, and something happens which sort of appeals to that kind of thing, and you tend to write a certain kind of piece. But the exact experience, I have personally never felt like when I'm writing on a cricket match, I would be wanting to write on how I experienced it.
No, in terms of, my question is not necessarily in terms of you bringing yourself in, but in terms of, say, let's take the tennis example. And I think we spoke about it on Twitter also with Kartikeya. It's like the classic 1540 example, right?
Yeah.
Serving the ace when you're serving two aces when you're 1540 and say 2 set points down, stuff like that. As a fan, you would react to it in a certain way and you would talk about it in a certain way. But then to consciously make a decision to, not bring that aspect into it when you're actually writing on the game.
I have never felt like that kind of temptation in my writing. Seriously.
Okay. That's interesting because for me personally, it becomes difficult because I feel like even though of course now I don't write about the game in a way that you do. I don't write full time about it. I'm more writing about it as I'm writing as a fan. I'm writing for as a for my personal passion. And I feel I often tend to move towards bringing in my experience of the game itself, not necessarily the I, as I say, the whole feeling of how one feels while watching the game. And I felt when I was full-time covering cricket, I felt that was something that I had to consciously avoid, because obviously you can't you need to be invisible, and your experience also is not what people are necessarily looking for in the piece.
Why do you need to avoid it? If a passage of play moved you, it must have moved you for the right reasons, and you just look for the reasons and write about that.
Yeah, I think I could I would try and avoid it in the match piece. like either the match report or the second piece that you usually write when you're on the ground. You write this analysis, right? Or back then, as we pompously called it, the verdict. Yeah, the pompously named verdict that we used to have. I used to try and avoid it there. But of course, you have all these diaries that you write. You have you have so many other formats that you can write, magazine pieces. I used to bring it in there because, for me personally, I'm also a fan. So for me, I can't completely eliminate that fan side of me, but I used to try to. So
what happens is if I'm moved by something, I don't tend to write what I experienced, but I tend to look why is it this passage that has moved me, and I'll tend to go into what has led to that, and I tend to focus around that phase of play in side pieces.
Exactly what I'm saying. See, I'll give you a classic example. In 2006, in India played Pakistan in a one-day match in Lahore, and that match where India chased and won, and Sachin made a great 90 odd, and Dhoni and Yuvraj were there. Basically, in that match, it was the conditions were extremely swinging and seaming, and Tendulkar was brilliant in terms of how he left the ball. In the early stages. And then once that early stage is passed, then he started playing his strokes. Now that bit about him leaving the ball was very moving for me because I hardly used to notice Tendulkar leaving the ball back then. And then that day I really noticed it, but I couldn't write it in the main piece because there are so many other things happening. So I wrote a small side piece about him leaving. And Cricinfo gives you the option, but if I was working for a newspaper, who would give me that option?
But again, you're telling the cricket story. You're not following into any narrative arc. You're telling about the cricket. This is a telling of the cricket.
Yeah. But I also brought in the fact how, personally, while watching Tendulkar, how I hadn't observed that before. So that bit of me was there, which was in a side piece. Yeah. So obviously I couldn't have brought that in the main piece. Yeah.
I think it was 14 years ago. If it happened today, you wouldn't necessarily go into how you hadn't observed it, but you would write a piece on it.
No, but that's fine. No, but that's not necessary. You are writing about a particular subject in the game, a particular event in the game, and you are saying you're writing about a particular event in the game, right? You're not claiming that is the sort of the match defining event. That's not a description of the contest, right? That's a description of one thing in the contest, and of course there's room for that. I mean, I do that as well. I sometimes I watch a spell, and the spell stays in my mind, and then I write about it. Nobody reads it, but that's that's okay. But that's not really the. I mean, there's such a large universe of things to write about in the game, right? But the point is that when you're answering the question who won and why did they win, right? That question has to be answered on the game's terms, not on the terms of what makes a good story, right? That is where the real chauvinism. That's the only place in the game where the chauvinism lies, because elsewhere there's no. It's like you're a theater critic elsewhere, right? You're right. You're writing about, Steve Smith's footwork or something like that. That's fine, or Chandra Paul's stance, or I don't know, Ashwin's, how should I put it? Ashwin's tendency to experiment excessively in helpful conditions, or whatever it is. That's all fine. No, that's all part of. I mean, who's going to read that? People who are really interested in Ashwin, or people who are really interested in what a good stance is and what is not a good stance, and why Chandra Paul uses the stance he does. People who are already curious about those questions are going to read those things, right? But the basic question, what was the competition and who won and why? That's like the cricket 101 question. Right? That's like the foundational question. That's everything else is above that. People, everything else above that, like about the stance and about a particular spell in which one particular player played in a certain way, like Steve Smith against Archer or whatever, is for people who already understand why the game panned out the way it did. They don't really need that. That's a different audience, and that's also one of the wonderful things about Cricinfo, and one of the wonderful things about these expanded platforms is that the audience for that sort of thing has also grown, I think, in the last 10-15 years.
So the larger point of cricket is not everybody follows it for the reasons we do. If somebody is pandering to these narrative arcs, it's because people, maybe they don't want this real life, very logical explanation for things. Cricket, sport, entertainment exists for different reasons for different people. And there's a lot of people I know who will spend more time, more money, more energy into cricket for reasons other than our logical explanation of observation of why somebody won and why somebody lost. Who are we to deny them that? They are maybe not even escape. They are looking for some sort of entertainment, some sort of even storytelling, some sort of like beyond a boundary. It's like cricket is just for so many different, any sport is just, it means completely different things to different people. Are we to say, hey, you should not be following this for this? Because there's a bit of correlation between what media does and what people want.
You mean media often seeks to do what people want?
Yeah.
No, that's true. And there's always going to be that media. I don't think anything. I don't think you can stop that. There will always be match ka mujrim, and there will always be the celebrity of a superstar cricketer, and that's. I don't think you can stop that.
Somebody has gone and spent 20,000 rupees on tickets, taxi, pizza, Pepsi, which is no price, and they see somebody drop a catch in the last over. I'm not surprised they go after him.
Yeah. But the question is, should the writer go after him? Yeah. Even though he is probably, first of all, if that person is opening your report and expecting to see this and doesn't see it, should one cater to that? Is the question.
So I'll give you an example of what people expect you to do when we get a lot of feedback. I tell anyone, you want to grow thick skin, you should do commentary on Cricinfo.
I think it will eat Twitter alive.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
That's nothing. That's peanut gallery.
Yeah.
So they are not satisfied. It's a monster. They see Dhoni has not scored a boundary in the first 15 balls. They want critical feedback on Dhoni. Why are you not publishing it? Why is there not a single line written about it? Why is
it's a conspiracy?
So I'm equally you won't believe it. I'm equally pro Dhoni and anti Dhoni at the same time. It's not easy to not give in to that demand.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's especially in that ball by ball thing where you literally invite this sort of feedback. You actually post a link saying, "Tell us what you think." People are obviously going to tell you what they think.
And the thing is that there is no end to it. Okay, suppose the commentator criticizes Dhoni, then there will be 500 other people and say, this was too soft. Why are you being so soft on him? And then suppose the commentator actually says Dhoni is the worst player ever. Then you have this other set of Dhoni fans who will come and finish you off. So
you'll have whiplash, man. I was actually, I was going to suggest this to you. You should publish the reader comments on that Tewatia game. For Tewatia's sake. You should just anonymize, just take away whatever crazy handles they send. But publish the text.
It will still land us in legal trouble, even if we don't name them. So,
No, but Monga, you were saying something. Monga, go on. Yeah.
the larger ecosystem, which is supposed to be more sophisticated, also finds it tough to resist this temptation because they see, hey, people are talking that. People want that. Who are we to deny them that? Especially when the biggest problem that has happened is people now know a newspaper used to just sell. Nobody knew who's reading sports pages, business pages, main pages. Now everybody knows what article is read. It's not as a composite. So that has created a big problem. And there are targets and there are pressures. And people will feel we are not doing our duty if we do not have a piece talking about the villain of the day or the hero of the day, the conventionally accepted villain of the day or the hero of the day. And that's the market reality.
Yeah, I mean, the market reality is also, I was coming to that, is that at a time when, media as a whole and cricket was very much part of it is struggling, there is also, I mean, and of course, it's not like, even a platform like Cricinfo, which used to have people covering it from various parts of the world, has also, scaled down in terms of the coverage from various countries and has often been criticized of being an India-only website and all that.
Crick India. And at the same time, it's Crick India and anti-India.
Oh yeah. Of course, that is convenient. People will criticize whenever and think, yeah, of course. But my point is that, and the fact that there is so much cricket now, you have 3 formats, perhaps another format next year with the 100. Oh, of course, you have T10. You have multiple formats. You have like 5 formats, and then players playing all around. And pre-pandemic, you had leagues going on everywhere.
Yeah.
As a cricket writer, how much can you follow? So invariably, when you see a player for the first time, even though he has probably played 10, 15 matches before, you're experiencing him for the first time. It's not like you're seeing him from his domestic days and this days and that days. As
those days are gone when you if Rahul Tewatia, you saw him for the first time in IPL, you had seen him in 20 domestic matches before. That's not physically possible now. So, and there is that temptation to make a spot judgment on the first 10 balls they face. And if he had got out, there would have been pieces. Making those spot judgments that day. That is a big challenge where you don't see them in their formative years. You don't see them how they have reacted to different situations or how they play. That is a big challenge, which is why you need to be even more wary of getting into the narratives when you see them in their first few matches on the international level or the TV level where you're actually covering them.
I mean, coming to Rahul Tewatia is a guy who's actually been around the scene for a while.
And I also used that narrative arc because the only thing I remembered about him was, and it was a very, very striking thing, that a guy has gone out of his way. I wouldn't put myself in that position and, leave me open to bullying in the team where I go to the coach and say, hey, you didn't bring my name up. So that was the one thing that struck me about him. And it was you're also writing on persons at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wanting to tell our listeners that I will link that piece. Do read it.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting piece on Rahul Tewatia, very moving also at some level, because here's a guy who's like a journeyman in domestic cricket, who's been around for a while, has hardly got his name under the spotlight, and then here he comes and has this crazy day. And so I'll link that piece. Yeah, but Kartikeya, go
on. Multiple crazy days now.
Exactly.
Since then. No, but I mean, one of the things that's happening because of this, what Siddharth and you have been describing, is that the gap between what happens at the expert level, of the selectors and the under 19 and the camps and all that, the way they are making decisions, what happens there and what happens in the public discourse are completely removed. Because one of the things that BCCI has done is that they basically don't care what anybody says anymore because, they've decided that, people are idiots, and they don't have to listen to anybody. There's no shared public idea of what the game is, because the public is busy.
Earlier, the chairman of selectors used to have a press conference after every selection.
It's stopped now.
They gone back. Yeah.
Yeah, but they killed it. And I think they killed it for good reasons, because, for every cricket info guy who's going to ask a decent question, there's some guy who's going to say, oh, why didn't you pick this guy from my hometown? And selection is especially fraught because it's impossible to justify any selection. As Siddharth was saying, there are all these other incentives on the media, and there are all these other pressures which they have to address. You cannot turn away from them.
I think you're giving far too much credit to BCCI and selectors' thought process. Why they don't do this press conferences is one of the great examples is how MSK Prasad tried to justify Vijay Shankar's selection, which he has every right to. When he called him a 3D cricketer and we want a 3-dimensional cricketer. Look at that. Every time Rayudu scores a run, he's trolled. MSK.
And every time Vijay Shankar doesn't score a run, he's trolled.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean MSK Prasad is wrong, no.
No.
But there isn't an audience. There isn't an audience which is going to try to understand what the selector is saying.
I'm not saying whether the selector is good or not, and I'm just saying that the reason why they have stopped this discussion is because they don't want to be answerable and not because they think that nobody will understand.
Yeah, but I think they're right. I think they're right to not be answerable because I think that the way the world is right now, for every reasonable question the selector has to answer, there are going to be dozens of horrible questions, which are basically, some Hobson's choice or something which, challenges their motives or whatever it is, and it's just a waste of time. I mean, let's face it, the selectors answer to the BCCI. They don't answer to the public. And that's, I think, good.
There's no evidence.
The last thing you want is for the public to start selecting the test team.
There is no evidence of there being accountability on not just selection, on the team management or anything, the accountability from A to the BCCI. I'm not saying
but they're winning.
Well, it can be argued given this
is the best Indian team ever. Basically,
it could be argued that given the resources this country has, given the sway that the BCCI holds and can go about getting tour calendars, conditions, preparations, it could be argued they should be doing more.
Well, of course it could be. It can always be argued they could be doing more. That's not but the fact that they are not perfect is not. There's a big gap between being perfect and being incompetent, right? And that is where you need a discourse. You need a way to think about that. The way to think about that does not exist. You see, because firstly, selection is vastly misunderstood. Like the whole point of selection is that if you have a large pool of players, then by definition, any selected squad is going to be unfair. Because the whole point of having a good squad is that it is only possible if there are other players who are sort of almost as good or equally good who miss out. That is the only way you have a good squad, right? So it's always going to be unfair. And so therefore, when a selector comes up in a press conference, it's basically a crapshoot. Like there are no good answers he's going to have to. Like, why did you not pick this player who's 99% of the player that you picked? And then the selector says, well, my player is a 3D player. And it's like, this is not, this exchange is a symptom of there being absolutely no scope of any understanding about what's going on.
No, I think this is also like selection is like the lowest hanging fruit in this whole match ka mujrim kind of ecosystem, because the moment you lose a match, the first thing you say is this guy wasn't there, so we lost. Yeah. Or this guy was picked wrongly. See, he scored nothing, and it's proved. And when I was covering the game, one of the most frustrating pieces to write was on these selection pieces, because you have to write a piece before the selection as a preview, then you have to write a piece after the selection as a comment, and then invariably during the games you will have to write pieces about XYZ being selected and all that. So I mean, the way I did it, and I mostly did it, was to try and speak to people and put in their quotes in there so that I'm not saying much.
He said. I didn't say. He said.
He said. Yeah, with nobody saying anything, Monga, how do you do it?
So the only two ways of arguing against a selection has to be a guy's record and the slot that you think you need to fill. Like there are two guys. Somebody has scored 1,000 runs in the domestic season. Somebody has scored 600. And the selector has a hunch, or his expert view is, after having watched them, and we have not watched all those domestic games, maybe his view is, and that's why you can't outright say he's outright wrong in making a selection. But then there's also a slot requirement where you feel, this is a very, very reasonable question you could ask. Did India need a 3D player when Rayudu was doing a job for 1 year in the middle order, and he did a couple of rescue jobs with good efficiency, and which is what arguably India needed. And that's a piece you are not going to outright say they messed up, but did they really need to change the combination that had been working for them for a year and a half leading into the World Cup, and then go in with a player who has no experience, whereas you have spent 4 years, everybody has spent 4 years talking about we need players to have played at least 40 matches going into the World Cup. That is
Right.
That's a fair criticism, or
No, that is a fair criticism, but then the response to that is obvious. No, the response to that is, okay, the World Cup is in England, we need extra seam bowlers, and Vijay Shankar came on the scene, and as a rare seam bowling option, given that in the last 10 years, the India's options in this area, seam bowling all-rounder, have been basically Stuart Binney and Hardik Pandya. And now there's a third option. So it was a reason. The point is, when the selector says that, right? When the selector basically says that, then the person who asks the question, did we need Vijay Shankar, has to concede that it is a reasonable answer. Right?
Yeah.
But they don't. They don't. Nobody concedes that what the selector says is a reasonable answer. The way you have a discourse is by trying to see what is reasonable, right? Especially in something like selection, because otherwise, what is it? It's not an inquiry. It's a charge, and those are different things. And nobody in any walk of life is going to put up with that. You try to go tell a doctor or an architect, why did you make this decision, right? And they're going to give you an answer, right? And the point is, with a doctor especially, you are often not able to make out whether it's a reasonable answer or not, right? But suppose you are, like, as a cricket reporter or as a cricket writer writing about selection, you should be able to decide what is a reasonable answer and what is not a reasonable answer. Then, if you're fair-minded, you have to be prepared to concede that, that is a reasonable answer. So,
No, but there's a way to say it's a highly risky choice that the Indian team management and selectors have jointly made going into a World Cup. And as with every risk, there are risk and rewards, and they ended up it so happened that they were in a game where a player like Rayudu would have been more beneficial than a player like Vijay Shankar, but it's a decision they made. They couldn't foresee future. It's a decision they made. They will live with it.
Yeah, and anyway,
they won 7 out of 9 games.
And the thing is that a lot of the criticism came before before.
Like, for example,
right, but just because someone says that, why did you pick Vijay Shankar, that by itself is not a criticism.
Let me rephrase it. Not criticism, but
the question
or the analysis of the selection. Okay, not necessarily
Right, but
criticism. But
I think
all
the
what I'm
question
saying
was-
is it was proactive. It wasn't reactive. It was a lot of it was proactive as well.
And you
Well,
lost
fair enough.
And you lost when it really mattered. So hence proof.
Yeah, that is true. They didn't lose when it really mattered. No, I don't know. I find myself on the side of the selectors on this, which is that I think based on what I've seen, there is no chance that if they say reasonable things, they are going to be received as reasonable things. There is no chance. Like, okay, Siddharth might do it. Siddharth might listen and might say, okay, yeah, okay, that's reasonable. I may not agree with it, but it's reasonable. These are like, there are 3 options here, and they're all roughly the same, and they maybe give the team different things, the squad different things. But I would have gone with this one, but they're going with this one, and this is why they're making this choice, and this is what they want to achieve. Fine, he will write this whole piece, 800 words, 1,000 words, he'll put it. But he's one guy.
But I'll admit that I've been harsher than this. For example, during the Perth test when India went in with 4 quicks, with the history of India's history of not doing well with 4 quicks, all 4 were like number 11s. And it was a series where the spinners were doing well. It was a pitch where spinners, and I was actually much harsher than this on day one and not in hindsight.
When I was thinking of this podcast, it struck me at some level that the players are the biggest narrative mongers in this whole business.
True.
Okay,
Yeah.
they are in fact bigger narrative mongers than the writers themselves.
Of course they are. They are like contested. They are like, it's like if you ask like Arjun about the Mahabharata, he's not going to fucking tell you like one, 30,000 foot view of the Mahabharata. No, he's going to tell him how awesome he was.
Like during this IPL, you see mid-innings interviews, and they usually catch the batsman who's just coming out after scoring 60 or 45 balls. And they ask them about conditions, and invariably everybody will say, "Oh, it's very difficult conditions. It was slow." Whereas the other day, when he scored a 50, they got him for the interview. He said, "No, it's a good wicket because there's a good ball on it."
See, you talk about like the game that matters and all that, but if you go in, do a search and you see, then you find players like AB de Villiers and so many South African players talking about how they haven't done well in the games that matter.
AB de Villiers is the most frustrating interview I've ever done. Like I spent an hour asking him what makes you good and how do you manage to do these kind of awesome things. All he's like, no, you have to play for your country. If you think about the team and not about your own self, you will end up. So AB, I can't do this.
I mean, but they have got probably like some media manager sitting on their head telling them what to say. No?
Of course.
And there's a big premium on being secretive. I don't know why they feel that, but they do feel that there's a premium on being secretive, and you need not tell your.
I mean, you know why, right? I mean, obviously, what they want to appeal to as many people as possible. So they don't want to. What do you mean secretive in terms of their technique and all that?
Even in like not a press conference, you sit down with a player for a 2-hour interview. They will not. They try to hide more than they try to give it to you. It's very difficult. That's why interviewing is very difficult in cricket or any sport to actually get people to speak about tactics, strategies.
But is that because they probably feel inherently that even one small thing can be blown up into a Twitter viral trend?
Or it can help the opposition, or it can help. It might help somebody who's my competitor to come up the ranks, and it happens. It happens more with Indian players than Pakistani. Pakistani players are very open. They don't feel insecure about giving out their secrets.
Interesting. But earlier, I mean, the greats were very open about it. I mean, all the greats have openly spoken about their game and their technique, and in fact, even shared with the opposition. I mean, Bishan Bedi famously helped Pakistani spinners before a test in India and all that.
Tell me a good talking cricket interview with Indian cricketers where they talk about the game. Recent times.
Yeah, I mean, the Virat Kohli interview, he spoke about himself, but not so much about the game. Yeah.
Then I sit down with somebody like Shoaib Akhtar, who, despite his persona on social media, you sit and talk cricket to him, and he will And he talks like really well.
And even that Wasim Akram, Michael Holding thing was very good because they spoke about bowling, fast bowling. Yeah, which brings me to the final point. I mean, I've taken quite a bit of your time, but which brings me to the final point, which of course both of you are very familiar with, is that, the future. I mean, now, of course, compared to when I was covering cricket full time, now cricket writing and cricket is flush with data. And, a lot of, especially with T20, data is now just everywhere. And teams are obviously looking at it at a granular detail. There are books by Tim Wigmore and Freddie have written a good book on this whole topic. And I'm sure there will be more that come up. So as a writer, as cricket writing, say 5 years down the line, do you see that this whole, there being more of a, forget the mainstream. We know that is pretty much going to stay the same. But I'm saying even in places like Cricinfo and dedicated platforms, do you see the narrative being equalized more by, the overall telling of the game through data?
I think it already has. Especially, I can speak of my own writing. It has changed a lot where I hardly make any general statements. Everything I try to back with data.
Okay.
Yeah. In terms of, if I won't call somebody lucky, I would go and look into control percentages and, how many not in control balls were on an average were getting a wicket in that match, and this guy survived twice that number of balls before getting out. That kind of thing it has really enriched the way I see the sport, the way I write about sport, the access to data, and it's still only the starting point, because data is so. The problem with data is that it's so unstandardized and it's very, very raw right now. It is not sophisticated. There's only one company keeping exact record of the exact length of where the ball was pitched, and that company is very secretive right now. And a lot of data analysis depends on the length. That's the first thing we look at. And so there's a long way to go, and it will, next 5-10 years, it will only improve, and it will improve a lot the way we tell the game, the way we write about the game.
And in terms of, we spoke about catering to a market. How does that reconcile with it? I mean, is there like a large critical mass of audience, at least in your experience, who appreciate this and look for this? Or is this still much more a niche kind of setup?
I think they do. I mean, when it's in the presentation of this data where we have to get a little smarter. I mean, you can write a 1200 piece based on data, but you also maybe graphically represent it to break the piece where, somebody who wants a quick glance at what you might be trying to say within a minute, they should be able to get that quick glance based on an intelligent infographic. It's a specialized job, and you will have specialists who are doing infographics well.
For the first, now the data is, the record of ball-by-ball record of every game is available, right? And I know Cricinfo has a record going back 15, 16, about almost 20 years in some cases. What has happened is that what used to be the mainstream analysis, which was mostly qualitative, has become provincialized. So now there is a data or an analysis which begins with the record, and cues very closely with the record, and it relies very closely on the record. That analysis exists now. So there is something to contest the qualitative analysis, and so one of the things that's happened right now, the state right now, is that both are sort of provincial in their own way. I think in a sense there's going to be a synthesis of some sort. You can tell a richer picture of the game if you watch the game and if you observe it and if you have a systematic record of it. If you take all of those things together and you know how to read the record and you know how to watch the game, you will build a very rich picture of the game. You'll build a slightly less rich picture of the game if you only rely on the record. But now the record is there, and now whoever writes about cricket in the 2020s is going to have access to it. They're going to have access to ball by ball records, and they're going to have access to apps which are giving you statistics and whatnot. And eventually, I think, like what baseball has done, the authorities in cricket will publish a data stream. That's where I think it's going to go, because especially in places like with franchises, what's happening is that they're going to make money decisions based on the record, right? So it's not just that the guy who writes the match report is writing based on the record, right? The record is sort of forming the basis of who you buy, who you play, when, how, what. And if the teams are doing that, then the people who write about the game are going to have to understand what they're doing, right? What I'm interested to see is how the synthesis happens between the old style qualitative people who have this, and I'm talking about the really experienced observers, right, who started out in the 80s and 90s and who've been watching, and who are very diligent reporters and who write match reports and stuff, who are like Vijay Lokapalli, for example, or someone like that. How people like them are going to synthesize this whole, that would make for better reports, I think.
No, but one point I have is you seem very confident that this will be easily available. But don't you think that people will only try and guard this data even more closely, given that there are millions of bucks to be made off it?
Well, the ball tracking data is right now private, but everything else is public. I mean, ESPN publishes an API feed of all cricket matches. I use it. So one of my toy projects on the weekend, programming projects, is to build the database, and that's how I maintain my database.
No, that's true. But what Monga is saying about the ball
tracking, yeah, that is currently privileged. Yeah, like someone like CricViz has it, I think. Also, it depends. I think it depends on right now, it depends on who has the contract, right, for the broadcast and stuff like that, and what kind of things they make available. But I mean, eventually, every other sport, like, ice hockey, baseball, American football, basketball, the data is available publicly. Like, okay, there will always be a higher, more privileged level of data, enterprise level or whatever it is. Like, for, people who are making recommendations on, like, okay, if you want a number 5 in the IPL, who's very good at hitting spin bowling, these are your top 5 choices, this is the best bang for the buck. The people who are trying to do that sort of stuff, okay, they will have more privileged, higher level information, but basic ball by ball information is available, and that's already so rich.
But I'm not too confident about authorities, by the way. Authorities don't even put up videos of their own team playing online. So for them putting data may be a bit too much of a stretch.
Really? I found, like, in the last 4 or 5 years, like ECB and West Indies Cricket and SACB and Cricket Australia, they have sort of turned their whole archive into a YouTube thing, and they have like millions of hits on their highlights.
I'm talking about the authorities that matter.
Our fellows will show. Our fellows in 2007, our fellows, BCCI was like, in like February 2007 or January 2007, BCCI was dead set against the whole T20. Idea of T20. It was like, never, like, what is this nonsense? Like, this will never catch on. And then, like, Misbah-ul-Haq played that horrible, like, miss-hit lap sweep.
Yeah, the shot that
mattered. And now, 12 years later, you have the IPL for 12 seasons.
So what are you saying will be the equivalent there for putting out data? I mean, what, money?
I think it is in their interest to get their audience to understand what they're doing. at least to get the audience to have something to talk about.
It's not. When it comes to selections, right now you said
but that's India, right? That's like the India selection is like what? I mean, they're trying to pick a squad of 15 from what? 27 first-class teams. That's like completely impossible.
No, I think the best way for them to do it is to have a subscription model, and I'll pay for whatever data they give, whatever videos they have. But
I'll pay for a feed which has the ground ambient noise and no commentary. Let's first get there.
Oh yeah, let's first get there.
If they were really interested in what people wanted.
Yeah, but it matters. I mean, there will be new models of making of revenue and new models. I mean, this what is it? The 100, which was supposed to happen a few months back, it didn't happen. I mean, isn't that going to be free to air? I mean, who would have thought that? I mean, there's a different business model behind it, And like, if you can have the IPL, basically you can have anything. And even like even with I mean, let's face it, okay? Like all the innovation in Indian cricket has come from like this amateur BCCI.
No, it has been forced on BCCI.
So you and I might say everything about the BCCI constitution and the Supreme Court said, and they said make this law and have this new constitution, this and that, and like. The BCCI head honchos are dead set against that. But given that, like, the amateur head honchos produced this $1 billion industry, I wouldn't bet against them, like, shelling out for some radical change in the next 10 years.
They were actually the opposite of radical. It is actually forced on them. In the ICL happened before this.
Yeah. But they did, right? They didn't die.
No, what they did is...
The survival instinct is strong, man.
Okay. So given that we are now moving on to higher order of things...
which really matter.
which actually matter. Let us wind up this podcast that doesn't matter at all and thank Kartikeya and Monga for joining and giving us this lovely perspective. I also had one point, but I can bring. I'll use that to bring Monga back on the chat. I have to find ways to lure him back. So Monga, hopefully you'll join us again. There are legions of fans of yours who would love to hear more from you. And now that you're not on Twitter, at least come on our podcast, man. Come on.
I've spent the last 2 hours doing that only.
Yeah, okay. So when you're free...
And your favorite bogeyman is still a head coach of India. So you're going to be in demand, man. When was the last time the head coach of the Indian cricket team actually called out a reporter by name? Like, it never happens. Like most of them probably...
Right?
Yeah, that was a great moment. In fact, you should put it on your CV.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks, Kartikeya. Thank you.
He'll come back for the second. India have won the Test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wide.